Everyone in town knew about the Grayson house. It was old, abandoned, and wrapped in stories of people going in and never coming out. My brother Jake was one of them. 2 weeks ago, he disappeared. His last text was a picture of the Grayson house with a single word: going in. Nobody wanted to search for him, so I went alone. The house loomed like a predator in the moonlight, its door creaking open as if it had been waiting. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. Dust-covered furniture sat undisturbed, the clock's hands frozen in time. "Jake," I called, my voice echoing. No answer. Then I heard it, a faint tapping upstairs. The hallway stretched too long, leading me to a door at the end. Opening it, my flashlight flickered, and there he was. Jake stood in the corner, his back to me. "Jake!" Relief surged through me, but he didn't move. As I stepped closer, I saw his hands flat against the wall, fingers splayed unnaturally. Slowly, his head turned to me, his voice low and strained. "It won't let me go." The walls creaked as if alive. They pulsed and bubbled, oozing darkness. The floor under me softened, pulling me down. "You shouldn't have come," Jake whispered, his face twisted in pain. "Run!" The house growled, a voice everywhere and nowhere. "Stay!" I clawed my way to the door as the house roared around me. I made it out, gasping for air, but when I turned, Jake was gone. "People say he ran away, but I know the truth." The house still calls me, whispering my name every night. One day I know it will take me too. Mirrors always freaked me out. Something about the way they hold your image, like they're storing a version of you for later, just feels off. I never thought much of it beyond that, though, until I moved into that apartment. It was a good deal, almost suspiciously cheap for a place downtown. The landlord mentioned it came furnished, including a massive antique mirror in the bedroom. "Built into the wall, can't be moved," he said casually. I didn't think anything of it. The first night I noticed it felt strange, like I wasn't alone in the room. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of an old building either. It was quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. When I went to bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For a second, it felt like I hadn't just seen my reflection. I'd seen someone watching me through it. I laughed it off, chalking it up to nerves. But as the nights went on, little things started happening. My reflection sometimes lagged, like the mirror was struggling to catch up. Once, while brushing my hair, I turned away, only to see myself, still looking straight at me out of the corner of my eye. By the end of the week, it escalated. I woke up to a faint knocking sound coming from somewhere. Groggy, I followed it to the mirror. The knock came again, sharper this time, and then I saw it, my reflection tapping on the glass. Except it wasn't me anymore. The thing in the mirror looked like me but wasn't. Its eyes were darker, its smile twisted like it was trying too hard. "Let me in," it mouthed. I stumbled backward, grabbed my phone, and took a picture of the mirror, desperate to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. The picture showed nothing strange, just me, terrified, staring into my phone's camera. That gave me an idea. I turned on my phone's video mode and set it to record the mirror while I pretended to go back to bed. I laid there in the dark, heart racing, and waited. After what felt like hours, I worked up the courage to check the footage. My blood ran cold. The video showed me lying still in bed, but my reflection hadn't stayed put. The me in the mirror moved around the room, peering down at me, grinning. At one point, it bent close to the glass, tilted its head, and mouthed again, "Let me in." The moment I saw that, the mirror cracked from the inside, spiderweb fractures spreading as if something was trying to break through. I ran. I left the apartment that night, didn't even stop to pack my things. The landlord didn't seem surprised when I called to break the lease. All he said was, "It happens more often than you'd think." To this day, I avoid mirrors at night, especially antique ones. I don't know if it followed me or if the mirror found a new tenant. But sometimes, when I catch my reflection out of the corner of my eye, I wonder if it's really me looking back. Nobody visited the house on Ashen Ridge anymore. It had stood there for decades, abandoned and decaying, a crooked silhouette against the skyline. Kids dared each other to approach it. Teenagers told stories about ghosts and curses, but no one ever actually stepped inside, until I did. I wasn't trying to be brave or stupid. I was just desperate. My mom's medical bills were piling up, and when I overheard two guys at the diner talking about how people sometimes disappeared after going into the house, leaving all their belongings behind, well, that sounded like a jackpot to me. Jewelry, watches, wallets, if they hadn't come back to claim them, then they wouldn't mind if I did. That's how I justified it anyway. On the night I decided to go, the town was quiet, as if it was holding its breath. I walked to the edge of Ashen Ridge, flashlight in hand, the air growing colder with each step. The house loomed above me, its windows black and empty, its door half off its hinges. Even though it had been empty for years, there was no graffiti, no broken glass, just a layer of grime thick enough to coat everything like ash. The flashlight beam flickered across the overgrown lawn, revealing a narrow path where the grass had been trampled. Recently. I hesitated, nerves gnawing at me. But the thought of the unpaid hospital bills pushed me forward. The door creaked open with a touch, revealing a stale, heavy smell that seeped into my nose. The entry hall was surprisingly bare. No furniture, no wallpaper, just gray walls cracked and peeling. My boots echoed loudly on the wooden floorboards as I walked further inside. Dust floated lazily in the air, and the house seemed impossibly quiet, like it had swallowed sound entirely. That's when I saw the first collection. It was in the dining room. On the table were items laid out like museum exhibits: an old wristwatch, a locket, a pair of reading glasses, and a single, blood-stained shoe. Each item was placed with care, spaced out evenly on the dusty surface. A small card rested in front of each one with neat handwritten labels: Harold Benson, 1974, Margaret Ellis, 1982, Thomas Griggs, 1988. I backed away, unnerved, but curiosity kept me from running. Who had left these here and why? I moved through the house, and with every room the collections grew stranger. In the study I found children's toys, blocks, a faded stuffed rabbit, a model airplane, all labeled, each one paired with a name. The hair on my arm stood up as I realized that many of the items were incomplete. A torn shirt, a single sock, a pair of shattered glasses. Everything about it was wrong, and yet I couldn't make myself leave. Then I entered the basement. The air grew heavier as I descended the creaking steps, flashlight illuminating the concrete walls. The space below was vast, much bigger than I expected, and filled with towering shelves. On each shelf were jars, hundreds of them. Some were small, others larger than my head. The abandoned tracks behind my grandmother's house were forgotten relics, overgrown and warped. They were harmless, or so I thought, until the night I heard the train. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. to the mournful whistle, distant but growing closer. Grabbing my flashlight, I crept out to investigate. The fog swallowed the path ahead, but I kept walking, drawn to the pale yellow lights flickering in the distance. The train emerged, a hulking, rusted monstrosity with darkened windows. It screeched to a halt where no station existed, and a single figure stepped out, a tall, spindly shape cloaked in tattered clothing. Its uneven gait and elongated fingers made my skin crawl. It turned toward me, though its face was obscured, and I heard a guttural whisper. "Passenger, are you here to board?" Paralyzed with fear, I didn't answer. The figure tilted its head, then shuffled back into the train. As it departed, the ground beneath me stopped vibrating, and the fog swallowed the strange machine once more. The next morning I told my grandmother. To my surprise, she paled and muttered, "The collector's line. It takes those who don't belong." Her words haunted me, and I realized the figure reminded me of Uncle Leo, who disappeared years ago. Desperate for answers, I spent nights by the tracks, and eventually the train returned. This time I boarded. The inside was a tomb of shadowy figures, their gray, waxen faces lifeless. At the end of the car I saw him, Uncle Leo, barely responsive. Before I could reach him, the train lurched forward, and a sinister voice filled the carriage. "You boarded. Now you stay." The lifeless figures began to move, their stiff arms reaching for me. Panicking, I pounded on the door, screaming that I didn't belong here. The voice hesitated. Then with a screech, the door opened and I was hurled onto the tracks. The train disappeared into the mist, leaving me trembling under the rising sun. I've never gone back, but some nights I hear the whistle and I wonder if the line will come for me again. When I was a kid, the woods behind our town were my escape. They stretched on endlessly, filled with hidden trails and secrets. But there was one place we were always warned to avoid: a crumbling, moss-covered well deep in the forest. The stories were old, passed down through generations. The Well of Whispers, they called it. They said it could grant your deepest wish, but at a terrible cost. Most dismissed it as a spooky campfire tale, but one summer, my friends and I decided to find it. It was Jake's idea, of course. He was fearless, always the one pushing us to do things we'd later regret. So, armed with flashlights and a vague sense of direction, we ventured deeper than we ever had before. The well wasn't hard to find. The air grew colder as we got closer, and an unnatural silence fell over the woods. When we finally saw it, surrounded by a ring of dead trees, the air felt heavy, like it was waiting for us. "Creepy," Mia whispered, hugging herself. Jake grinned. "What's the big deal? It's just a hole in the ground." But it wasn't just a hole. The stones were blackened with age, and strange symbols were carved into the rim. As I peered inside, I felt dizzy. It was deeper than it should have been, the bottom lost to shadow. "Anyone brave enough to make a wish?" Jake teased. "I don't think we should," Mia said, stepping back. But Jake was already digging into his pocket. "I'll go first," he said, tossing in a coin. He leaned close, whispering something I couldn't hear. The air changed immediately. A low, almost imperceptible hum filled the clearing. Jake stumbled back, looking pale. "What did you wish for?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. The walk back was uneasy. Jake didn't crack a single joke, and that night I couldn't sleep. Something about the well clung to me, a wrongness I couldn't shake. The next morning, Jake wasn't at the usual hangout spot. By the third day, we were worried. By the end of the week, his parents called the police. Jake was gone. Months passed, but no one ever found him. The police called it a runaway, but we knew better. I couldn't stop thinking about that well.